Yes, pro wrestling is predetermined, but whenever a bunch of jacked up dudes with big egos get together, there's bound to occasionally be some genuine animosity. And sometimes it's a quick swipe or two, but it also has the potential to have a major butterfly effect in the industry. I'm Senior Siete for 7 Wrestling, and let's take a look at 7 backstage fights that changed the wrestling world. Now, if you enjoy this content, do us a favor and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and double underhook powerbomb that notification bell. Number 1. Nails vs. Vince McMahon. Nails is a footnote in WWE history. He wasn't around very long, he didn't have any memorable matches, and his time in the company has been buried, likely for the silly old reason that he assaulted the owner of the WWE. Yeah, that would probably do it. Kevin Wacoles, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, joined the WWE in 1992 as the former prisoner Nails. He claimed he was falsely imprisoned and was assaulted by prison guard the Big Boss Man, and he was out for revenge. Why he continued to still wear his prison jumpsuit? Well, that's a mystery. Long story short, Nails was given quite a push upon making his debut. He laid out the Big Boss Man and he was being matched up with the Ultimate Warrior and the Undertaker. But there was a disagreement over a SummerSlam payout for a squash match against Virgil that would lead to him taking on the biggest name in the company, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. Bret Hart would describe the altercation as Nails yelling at Vince for 15 minutes before knocking Vince over in his chair and choking him violently. Needless to say, Nails wasn't with the company for much longer after that. Lawsuits flew between the two parties, with Nails even accusing McMahon of sexual assault at one point. But nothing ever came of those accusations. And how did this fight change the face of pro wrestling? Well, in 1994, Vince McMahon was put on trial for conspiracy and illegally distributing steroids, and if he was convicted, he faced a prison sentence of 11 years. This was no small event and could have led to the end of the World Wrestling Federation. The first wrestler to testify that McMahon encouraged him to take steroids? None other than Kevin Nails Wacoles. However, his testimony was a train wreck, with Nails contradicting himself on a few occasions. Some even would say that this went a long way towards McMahon's acquittal. And all of this over a squash match with Virgil. Number 2. CM Punk vs. The Elite. AEW was on fire. They were scoring A-list free agents like Daniel Bryan Danielson and Adam Cole Bebe. They were creating their own stars, and their partnership with New Japan and other organizations were making them a must-see hub in the world of pro wrestling. But when they scored the biggest name on the board, the elusive CM Punk, wow, did things really take off. And things were good for a while, until one night during an in-ring interview, then AEW World Champion Adam Page said, "I will not be defending this championship against you. No, for the first time in my life, I'll be defending All Elite Wrestling from you." Okay, that's a pretty vague statement, and unfortunately, due to everyone and their mothers signing non-disclosure agreements, except this guy apparently, we don't have a great idea of what that meant. At any rate, CM Punk didn't like it, and after their match at Double or Nothing, a quasi-silent feud rumbled on behind the scenes between the duo. It all came to a head after the All-In pay-per-view in September of 2022, when Punk let loose in a media scrum. Punk, who was probably very frustrated because he knew he was going to be on the shelf due to an injury that had happened during the match, lashed out at the media, his former BFF Colt Cabana, Hangman Adam Page, the Young Bucks, and Kenny Omega. And during this tirade, he encouraged those he was talking about to pay him a visit in the locker room if they had a problem with him. Well, the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega did just that. Unfortunately, what followed is still a mystery due to those aforementioned NDAs, but in the aftermath, CM Punk was suspended and stripped of the AEW World title, and the Elite were suspended and stripped of their newly won 6-man titles. And the audience wasn't told anything. 4 of the company's biggest stars, 4 of their active champions, were removed from programming without a logical explanation. Worse than that, when the Elite did come back a few months later on the AEW reality show All Access, the Young Bucks could mention that they were nervous about coming back, but couldn't mention why they had left in the first place. All Access indeed. This all contributed to the narrative that Tony Khan didn't know how to manage a pro wrestling locker room, a narrative that very much continues to this day and helped foster moments like number 3, Andrade El Idolo versus Sammy Guevara. X. How did we survive without you? Or more importantly, how did wrestlers complain about not being used properly before they could just spout off their complaints on the internet? In this case, a whole real-life beef was started when Mr. Charlotte Flair told the world that Sammy Guevara wasn't thrilled with how snug some of Andrade's shots were during a match, to which Mr. Tay Mello countered that Andrade was a favor hire to get in good with Andrade's father-in-law and energy drink tycoon Ric Flair. Sammy also pointed out that Andrade had failed to get over in both WWE and AEW. Yikes, he did get over in NXT though. Which led to Andrade telling Sammy that he'd see him backstage at Dynamite. Wow, the first backstage fight with some promotion behind it. Take notes, Tony. And sure enough, Andrade roughed up poor Sammy, but it's not fair to say it's because Andrade is particularly tougher than Sammy. The truth is, Sammy was worried about losing his job, and Andrade was specifically trying to get fired. Not exactly an even playing field. You see, at this time, Vince McMahon had left WWE Creative, and several WWE stars were under the belief that their prospects would improve under Triple H-led creative regime, and Andrade was definitely one of them. It got so bad that Tony Khan would state that he wasn't going to fire someone over such an infraction, which, after what had gone down at All In with CM Punk and the Elite, was just another chink in the rapidly dwindling armor of the Booker of the Year. Number 4, CM Punk vs. Jungle Man Jack Perry. Come on, we can't do the first two without this one. CM Punk returned to AEW in the summer of 2023 with his own show, AEW Collision, where he was pretty much given carte blanche to do whatever he wanted with whoever he wanted. That'll teach him for getting into unprofessional fights. Rumors circulated in the wrestling media that Punk was running a tight ship, with certain talents being banned from the show altogether for being too chummy with the Elite, making harsh tweets, or a variety of other infractions. One of the talents on the show, Luke Perry's kids, supposedly ran afoul of Punk when he wanted to use real glass for a segment. Punk vetoed this and it was tossed on the list of reasons people were getting fed up with the best in the world. Fast forward to All In London, the biggest show in AEW history, and Jungle Jack made a snide remark about real glass into the camera during a pre-show. What happened next? Who knows? Damn NDAs. But the aftermath was so intense that Tony Khan has said that he feared for his life. Punk was punished by being released from his contract, where he immediately jumped to the WWE, where he will probably fulfill his lifelong dream of main eventing WrestleMania. The guy just keeps failing up. Amazing. So, in the aftermath of all of this, in a very short period of time, AEW went from being the hot alternative to the WWE to the rich kid's vanity project where several talents are just desperate to return to the warm embrace of wrestling's corporate overlords. Number 5, Kevin Nash vs. Jean-Pierre Lafitte. Wait, how could a fight between a wrestling truck driver and a wrestling pirate have that much of an effect on the sports entertainment business? Well, that wrestling truck driver happened to be one of the key players in one of the most influential groups of talent in the 90s. I'm talking about the Clique. Made up of Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Shawn Michaels, Sean Waltman, and whoever this is, and maybe Aldo Montoya, kinda? The Clique was the dominant backstage faction in the WWE. They were always in Vince McMahon's ear, to the point that McMahon somewhat fancied himself a secret member himself. And with Nash holding the company's biggest belt and getting the single biggest babyface push since the heyday of Hulk Hogan, the Clique held quite a bit of power. So, when wrestling pirate, that's just fun to say, wrestling pirate Jean-Pierre Lafitte didn't want to lose to Kevin Nash cleanly in Montreal because apparently there's an unwritten rule about protecting French-Canadian wrestlers in Canada, it put him on the Clique's hit list. The next night in Quebec, whether intentional or not, Lafitte got a little too snug with a top rope leg drop. This caused Nash to pop up and pound the pirate with some pretty legitimate punches to the face. Eventually, they'd figured things out and actually finished the wrestling match, but Lafitte was done. Fired shortly thereafter, and the message was clear: the Clique was in control, and as long as they had Vince's ear, they could do whatever they wanted. Which led to number 6, Bret Hart vs. Shawn Michaels. They might be the two most infamous words in all of professional wrestling. Sunny days. And since it's been 25 years since those words were first uttered, I'll be happy to give you a quick recap. Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart were two of the best wrestlers in the world in 1987, and they were building a rematch of their WrestleMania 12 Iron Man Classic. And no, we're not talking about Montreal, we're talking about a few months earlier at that year's King of the Ring. People forget about this, but Bret challenged Shawn to a match where if he couldn't beat Shawn in less than 10 minutes, then he would never wrestle in the United States again. Shawn countered that Bret couldn't last 10 minutes with him or in any situation. Get it? It's an intercourse joke. Good job, HBK. And he'd say this in spite of the fact that Bret had been experiencing some sunny days lately. Sunny days, of course, insinuating that Bret Hart was having an affair with WWE superstar and current inmate Tammy Sunny Sitch. Which was a messed up thing to say for two reasons. One, Michaels himself was being intimate with Sunny at the time, and two, Bret's wife was probably watching Monday Night Raw and didn't appreciate the insinuation. Now, whether or not there was a relationship between Bret and Sunny, both have denied it to this day, even though Bret admitted to a ton of marital impropriety in his book, and Tammy, well, Tammy doesn't have any secrets. So, an enraged Bret took things out on Shawn backstage at the June 6, 1999 episode of Monday Night Raw. And while there are two very different accounts to what happened during this brawl, the one thing that is consistent in everyone's account is that Bret tore a rather large chunk out of Shawn's hair. A chunk of hair that Shawn threw on Vince McMahon's desk when Shawn told Vince that he was quitting the WWE because it was an unsafe work environment. And apparently, a chunk of hair that Jim Cornette pocketed for posterity, which now may or not belong to his ex-wife. And how did this little spat change wrestling? Well, Bret refused to work with Shawn, and the King of the Ring match was changed to Shawn versus a hot up-and-comer you might have heard of, known as Stone Cold Steve Austin. And that match is a secret banger. But more importantly, 6 months later, number 7, Bret Hart versus Vince McMahon. You probably don't need a refresher on what happened at Survivor Series 1997, but just in case, Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels were friends who were torn apart by professional jealousy. Shawn said he'd never lose to Bret, so Bret didn't want to lose to Shawn in Canada. Vince couldn't afford Bret's 20-year contract anymore, so he encouraged Bret to leave. Bret scored a sweet deal with WCW, but didn't want to drop the WWE title to Shawn Michaels in Montreal on the way out, so there's Montreal again. So, Vince and Shawn conspired to have referee Earl Hebner pretend that Bret Hart submitted to his own submission hold the sharpshooter, and Shawn walked out with the belt. Whew. Which leads us to what happened backstage after the match. As seen in the documentary Wrestling with Shadows, Bret told Vince that he was going to take a shower, and if Vince was still around afterwards, he was going to knock him out. Vince stuck around, and then Bret proceeded to knock him out, man of his word. And this isn't just hearsay. Bret admits to cleaning Vince's clock in the documentary. There's even footage of a woozy Vince being led away. So why is this important? Well, Bret had a clause in his contract that allowed for reasonable creative control for the final 30 days of his contract. And being made to submit to your own finisher in front of your home country, which is the exact opposite of Bret expressed that he wanted, probably falls outside of the definition of reasonable. As WWE was financially on the ropes at this time, it's possible that a lawsuit from Bret Hart could have sunk the entire company. But the possibility of that lawsuit goes out the window when Bret assaults the owner of the company and then admits on camera that he did it. So if that one punch had never happened, pro wrestling as we know it might be very different. Well, there's our list. Did we forget any backstage fights that had huge implications on pro wrestling? If so, leave them in the comment section below. Also, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and put the notification bell in the sharpshooter. Until next time, I am Senor Siete for 7 Wrestling saying bye-bye.